Everyone, thanks for watching. This is the third video on concepts. We have already seen two things. First, we have seen how a case is linked to concepts through the population, the relation between the three elements. Second, we have seen how to move from a case to a concept through the operation of conceptualization. Here in this third video, I would like to focus more closely on the relation between concepts and cases. To this end, I rely on Goertz's three levels framework, which is in your reader. So Goertz distinguishes three levels for each concept. The first and the higher level is the concept level. That's most of the time one single term. Here I take the example of totalitarianism, taken from Leuven 2000. But all the concepts that can be a starting point for your thesis, like trust, like co-production, like professionalism, Europeanization, are actually at this highest level, right? So there is only one term at this level. Most of the time, you define this concept through a number of attributes, and that's the second level. In this example, Linz defines his concept of totalitarianism through three attributes. A totalitarian regime has a guiding ideology. It has, second, a monistic power center. And third, it relies on the mobilization of its citizens. Okay, so most of the time when you start your thesis, you say, okay, I'm going to devote my research to the theme of trust. One of the first steps is to define what you mean with trust. This first step is captured by these first two levels of concept and attributes. Later on, you will need to develop the third level, which is the indicator level. Okay, this is fine. You define totalitarianism through the attribute of monistic power center, but what do you actually mean with that? And how are you going to measure in concrete cases whether you have a monistic power center or not? To do this is to define indicators, right? In this case of Lin's totalitarianism concept, two indicators are provided. He says monistic power center does not mean that there is only one group, there are many groups, but none of these groups has an independent existence and influence from the power center. Okay, so you see the move is from abstract at the higher level to the concrete at the lower level, right? So each concept can be defined through these three levels: concept, the single word, attributes, the way you will define your concept, and indicator, or the bridge between the definition and the case studies or the survey. Okay, now the next point is, how are you going to link one level to another? Goertz distinguishes two ways to do that. The most classical way of doing that is the necessity-sufficiency relation. You will consider the higher level as present if and only if all the elements of the lower level are present. If one element of the lower level is lacking, you won't consider your case as an instance of this concept. So if we go back to Leuven's example of totalitarianism concept, he is pretty clear about how both levels should be linked. He says, we have a totalitarian regime when we have an ideology, when we have a monistic power center, and when we have mobilization. If one of these attributes is lacking, we are not faced with a case of totalitarianism, but more likely one of authoritarianism. right? So most of the time when you define a concept, you define it through a necessity sufficiency relation. You need all the elements of the lower level to consider that you have the higher level. Right? This example is taken for the first two levels, but can equally apply to the latter two. There is another way on which you can link two levels, right? And this is the family resemblance relation. In this case, you will consider the higher level as present if some of the elements of the lower level are present. The classical example provided by Goertz is that of welfare states. What is a welfare state? Generally, you will tend to define a welfare state by the services provided to the population. Such services could include unemployment insurance, sickness insurance, pension schemes, family allowance, maternity leaves, etc., etc. Well, in the reality, you will see that most governments, not every government, provide all these services. In some countries, pension schemes could be privatized, right? And government could only provide the remaining services. Well, such countries tend to be nevertheless considered as cases of welfare state because the attributes are linked to the concept through a family resemblance relation. That is, you consider that if a government provides 3 out of 5 services, you will consider it as an instance of a welfare state. The second example, taken from Bovet 2007, involves the three levels, right? So Bovet is interested in the concept of co-production. And sorry for not having written the word over there. So he defines co-production being the concept, by these attributes. Provision of services, one, through regular long-term relationship between professionalized service providers and service users of other members of the community, where all the parties make substantial resource contribution. Okay, so we have a couple of attributes to define co-production, certainly provision of services, presence of professionals and users, and some additional criterion of long-term relationship and of the provision of substantial resource contribution. Generally, you would go on by saying what you mean, right? By what you mean by these attributes. That is, you would go down from the attribute level to the indicator level. And you would say professionals can be physicians, teachers, lawyers, social workers, security officers, whatever, right? You want your definition to apply to all these contextual factors. You won't put an and here, you put an or. Also, he speaks about contribution, resource contribution. Yeah, resource can be financial or human, right? Contribution can be financial, material, or something else. Generally, that's quite a typical way of defining concept. You would have necessary sufficient relation between the concept and the attributes, and then a family resemblance relation for the relation between attributes and indicators. Now, that's about the relation between levels. But now the question is, under which conditions will you consider an element as present? Well, there are actually two ways to do that. The first and most evident way is dichotomous. My element is there or it is not. There is an employment insurance or there is not. There is an ideology or there is no ideology. Such an instance, what you measure a difference of nature or qualitative difference. The other way of measuring the presence of an element is to have a continuous measurement. The element is more or less there. You may have unemployment insurance, but this may have varying degree of coverage, varying degree of benefits. It is to some extent possible to quantify the presence or absence of unemployment schemes. With continuous measurement, we consider that we have a difference of degree between presence and absence of an element. Or in other words, you can quantify the presence of an element. Let's take an example. One definitional attribute of the concept of new public management is the use of managerial techniques. Most of the time, if you take whatever country, whatever organization, you will always find some management techniques used to a certain extent. That's most of the time the reality. You have two options as a researcher. You can put a threshold and say, I will consider that there are management techniques used if this and that. Or you can say, okay, I will give 1 point if I find one management techniques, 2 points if I find two, and I will multiply this by the extent of use. You can find many scales like this in the literature. So the choice is here to measure on the dichotomous way or on the continuous way. Generally, concepts and attributes are linked together through a necessity-sufficiency relation. Why? Because you most of the time need to provide an unambiguous definition of your phenomenon. It is quite uncommon to say, okay, democracy it's either human rights or rule of law or elections. You choose what you want. No, generally when you define something, you want to be firm and you want to say, if and only if these elements are there, I will consider my concept as present, right? To the contrary, attributes and indicators are generally linked together through a family resemblance relation. Why? Because your attribute tends to manifest itself on different way depending on the context. So yeah, I will come back to an example later, but actually family resemblance allow to insert contextual variation into your conceptual chain. And generally measurement is continuous because social reality has a strong tendency to be fuzzy. So let's take an example that some of you will further work upon. Bowen's theory of access. So it's a theory about situations when lobbying occurs. Bowen says lobbying occurs when public institutions need crucial information for decision-making purposes. This crucial information is called access good by Bowen. That's attribute number one of the concept of lobbying. It puts an and, right? It is not or, we need both. And second attribute, private institutions are able to provide this access good. Okay, if we have both conditions, both attributes are present, then we have lobbying. The relation between these two levels is of necessity, sufficiency, nature. But then it goes beyond that to say, what do I actually mean with access good? And he says, what I mean with access good is expert knowledge, for instance. But it can also be, for instance, information about the interests of the industry, or assert possibility information about the interests of the consumers. So this means that if you were to work with Bowen's theory of access, what you are going to look after in your cases are such kind of access goods. You will look for instances where supply and demand of expert knowledge meet, where and demand of information about interests meet, right? In the practice, what you will find? You will find that public institutions always need information to a certain extent, that private institutions are always able to provide it to a certain extent, right? You will find that the access goods are a bit about expert knowledge, a bit about the interest of the industry, to some extent about the interest of the consumer, right? So generally you will have a bit of lobbying, right? Because you have a bit of access goods. So that's a challenge we will come back later on. Thanks for watching.